Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. This is Dan Turchin, host of AI and the Future of Work, CEO of Insight Finder, the system of intelligence for IT operations, and executive chairman of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I think you're going to enjoy today's discussion. We scratched the surface of how data is used to make autonomous decisions with Bar Moses from Monte Carlo Data and Haishan Wang from Instacart. Well, today we'll focus on a different kind of data and a different set of ethical dilemmas that it's creating. Evangelos Simoudis is the managing director of Synapse Partners. He's a deep thinker, investor, advisor, and futurist who has been at the forefront of some of the most impactful trends in Silicon Valley over, say, the last 25 years. Evangelos is also the author of two popular books about autonomous vehicles and urban mobility, and he's written extensively about trends in AI and big data. Today, we get a rare glimpse into the mind of someone who isn't just writing about the future of work, but also investing in it. I encourage you to read Transportation Transformation and the Big Data Opportunity in Our Driverless Future if you haven't already. And without further ado, Evangelos, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you share a little bit about your background?
Dan, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a great pleasure to know you for a while now, and it's a great opportunity for me to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate it. I came to the U.S. about 40 years ago to study. So my studies involve electrical engineering as my undergraduate at Caltech, and a PhD in computer science, and in particular in AI and machine learning from Brandeis. I worked as a technologist back in the 80s during the previous AI spring for several years, and came to Silicon Valley in 1990. Between 90 and 2000, I did two startups, and in between the startups, I was an executive at IBM running their analytics division globally. And the startups were also in the area of predictive analytics in different domains. After selling the second startup, I moved to the venture side, initially in private equity and later in venture capital. And 5 years ago, with one of my partners who started from my previous firm, who started Synapse Partners, as you mentioned. And I would say this 20-year journey that I've had in investing, it has also been around applications of data and AI, specifically machine learning. That's what led me to online advertising and online marketing many years ago, and more recently in autonomous mobility.
So take us on a little history tour. So since you started writing the first book on autonomous driving, where have we come? And when you started writing the first book, where did you think we'd be here in 2021?
So I ever since I started both researching and started speaking about the upcoming book at that time, and later on after the first book was published, I thought we were expecting the adoption, well, first of all, the incorporation of this technology and its adoption to be much faster than I thought it would be. So I was much more hesitant to the prognostications and the predictions that several pundits were making, particularly on the kind of marketing side and the various types of press. So if I were to, with that in mind, I would say that we're doing quite well in the areas of goods delivery, specifically the last mile and middle mile is called delivery. We are in way advanced pilots and generating companies are generating revenue. I also think that we're doing quite well in the area of low speed autonomy for passenger transportation. So this is using autonomous vehicles that that travel in up to 25 miles per hour. I think the area which has received the most attention, the use case that has received most attention, that of robo taxis, is where we have not met expectations. And as I was saying before, in my mind, this is not unexpected. I very much expected that we will be where we are today, but it's unfortunate that we build up this expectation that by now we will have autonomous robo taxis kind of like roaming around many cities around the world. I will also say that we're starting to do quite well with autonomous vehicles for specialized applications, whether it is applications for agriculture or for various other controlled environments, mines, for example. But the completely open-ended use case, which robo-taxis represent, I think we still need quite a bit of work before we can be 100% there.
It's hard to ignore the ethical implications of autonomous driving. What advice do you have for, let's say, the developers of the algorithms that are deciding what autonomous vehicles should do? And I'll give you kind of the canonical example. You know, who gets to decide if the autonomous vehicle swerves to, let's say, hit an elderly pedestrian to avoid a school bus of children?
You know, it's a hard question the way you pose it, but I'll kind of like parse it in a couple of different ways. First of all, I think when we build autonomous systems, and it doesn't matter whether they are for goods delivery, for terrestrial goods delivery, for aerial delivery of goods or passengers, I think it is important to look at them as systems. And systems means from the ground up, from the low level sensors and actuators all the way up to the final to the applications that run on top of them. And I think one of the mistakes that I often see corporations do, both corporations and startups. I mean, as you said in your introduction, my firm advises several large corporations in a variety of industries, including automotive and transportation, on the use of data and AI, and particularly autonomous and next generation mobility systems. We find that they're focusing on what can be thought of as the application layer, so the planning, the localization, and they tend to ignore the lower level, which is the operating system of the vehicle. And I think that's based on certain examples that we had from our recent work. We're coming to see that several of the companies that have been working on autonomous vehicles have been hitting the wall, or have been hitting various significant obstacles because of this, because they're not looking at the entire system. And they, the entire system that needs to be put together in one with one design in mind, with one thread in mind. Now, when we go to the second part of your question about the decisions, this is actually a very big and important problem, which it's not only involving software engineers and hardware engineers, but it involves ethicists. And in fact, it is so prominent that it has its own name. It's called a trolley problem. So if you if your listeners were to look up trolley problem and autonomous vehicles, they will see both an extensive literature of technical and scientific papers, as well as more popular papers that describe the problem. So with it, and I think both aspects, both answers to your questions, in my mind, speak to the fact that there needs to be a broad collaboration between the various groups, the various areas of expertise that need to come together in order for us to have safe and richly functional autonomous systems, regardless of the use case that we apply to them. For a few of our corporate customers, we have developed a very extensive map of use cases, and it's first of all, it always surprised them at how large that map of use cases is. But more importantly, again, even if you were to peel each use case and look at it in detail, you realize that it's not a single competency that has to work well in order for the use case to be successful, but different areas of expertise, as I said, need to come together. And one of them is the ethics part, because whether it is in passenger mobility or goods delivery, or, as I said, whether it's on the ground or whether it is aerial, there are ethical problems that will need to be considered by these systems.
One of the biggest concerns that I have is that once, let's say, the technology, call them impediments, are resolved, we just may realize that the real impediments to kind of broader adoption of autonomous vehicles are a combination of regulatory and even cultural. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like, are we making faster progress on the technology than we are on those other domains?
First of all, you're absolutely right, and it is not a characteristic only of autonomous systems, but in various other technologies that we have tried to apply, that have come out of Silicon Valley or other parts of the world, that we've tried to apply in our corporate or personal lives. We've seen technology being ahead of regulation or culture. But in the book Transportation Transformation, I tend to talk about three areas that where we need to be working consistently and on an ongoing basis. There's technology, obviously, because even if you look, as I was saying before, even if you look at where we are with regards to the technology of autonomous systems, there is still a lot of problems to be solved before we can comfortably start deploying them on a variety of use cases. The second area is that of trust, and you can your point of culture comes is woven into the area of trust, but we've done surveys and we've seen other surveys where consumers, in particular, where you're thinking about passenger mobility, consumers think very seriously about how much to trust this system and to what extent, and you see this trust being cultural. In other words, in certain cultures, you see much higher trust even in these early days of autonomous vehicles than in other cultures. So trust is something that we need to keep working on, and it will involve education. It will involve extensive trials. It will involve, making certain investments in people, and as I said, in these use cases. The final point is understanding deployments and determining where these systems will be deployed, and how the organizations that are involved in these deployments, whether it is corporations, cities, smaller municipalities, they need to be they need to understand what needs to be addressed, and address it properly. So in some cases, this may require a regulation, and in some cases, these issues that we talk about, they will be regional, and in other cases, they will be global. Technology, for example, will be a global issue, right? And if we start looking into these three areas again consistently, and not in a siloed way, I believe that, as I stated in the book, we will create a virtuous cycle where the lessons that we're learning from the technology will be used to improve our trust in the use cases, and they will impact the regulations that we need to create in order to again take best advantage of the technology, and create the highest level of trust by the users of the technology. And if we can do that, then I believe that we will be able to develop business models that will be effective on a consistent basis. Because one of the concerns that I've been talking about is we spend so much time on the technology aspect, and making the technology become as good as possible, that we tend to frequently ignore under what business models we will be able to make these businesses effective, right, and attractive. So we've been spending, as you know, tremendous amounts of money on autonomous systems, and we can see that we talk about the financial promise that they hold, but we still need to prove that this promise can be achieved.
Now, you talk about, or I should say you write about, the impact of new forms of mobility on urban life. Now, kind of building on that theme of adoption being predicated on trust, my question is, who's going to get to write the rules when it comes to what you can and can't do in an urban setting? Is it the municipality? Is it the corporation? Is it an insurance company? How is this all going to come together? At a point when, let's say I can reliably commute to my office downtown, through a robotaxi.
Yeah. So I think rules will be created by every constituency, not only the ones that you mentioned, but many more. I mean, because if you think, for example, of the fact that these vehicles will be most likely electric or electrified, or zero emission vehicles, utilities will need to get involved. And if you are moving for a long distance using such a vehicle, you talked about your commute, it may be that telcos will need to be involved, because these vehicles need to be constantly communicate with some control mechanism, some control organization, like most likely their fleet operators. So I think that there will be different constituencies that are going to have to write rules. And that's why, by the way, one of the major theses of the book, of the transportation transformation book, is that we need to start looking at urban transportation as a system, not as a collection of silos, which is what we have today. I mean, today we have privately owned vehicles, and transportation using such vehicles is one silo. Public transportation is a second silo. On-demand mobility services are a third silo. And by and large, at least until recently, these silos have been operating independently. They don't even, in many ways, they don't even acknowledge each other's existence. That cannot continue if we want, and it cannot continue not only because of the problems that we see our pre-pandemic cities facing, but even as we start to introduce autonomous vehicles in more use cases within an urban environment, that siloed approach will create big problems. So all of these constituencies need to come together to start setting up the rules. Now, some of the rules I think will be codified, right, in a formal sense. Other rules will be the results of etiquette. And we've done that over the years even for the driving that we do, right? How you and I drive our vehicles, or how we ride our bikes, or our other, our scooters, or whatever other we use, how we walk. So I think that this will be that's how we'll start creating and instituting the rules. And I think even some of the rules will be use case specific, whereas others will cover the entire urban transportation spectrum.
Evangelos, I'm going to make a public apology. I feel like oftentimes I violate the rules of etiquette when I'm driving, but point well taken.
One of the questions that we often asked when we think about when we are asked to evaluate autonomous systems is particularly when you think about autonomous vehicles that operate in an urban environment. The question is, how will the vehicle be able to understand the local idiosyncrasies? So the example that is often brought up is Boston, or driving in Boston is very different than driving in New York, is very different than driving in Singapore or in San Francisco. And how you embed this type of idiosyncrasies, and this is, I mean, by etiquette, into a system, a deterministic system that is supposed to operate without the intelligence of a human, what you hope to be the intelligence of a human, is something that does occupy now more and more of the technologists and the other people who are involved in making autonomous systems a reality.
It's hard to have a conversation about AI without thinking about the data that is being fed to the models and the potential impact that biased data can have. Let me give you an example. Feel free to pick another one if it's more relevant. But if I train an AI in a self-driving vehicle, let's say on how to yield to pedestrians at dusk, or in poor light, and let's say the vehicle gets trained to have poor accuracy when, let's say, people of darker skin are crossing the street. What are the kinds of things that I can do as a developer, or even as a vendor, to mitigate the potentially catastrophic impact of training AI models on biased data?
The issue of introducing biases to the intelligence systems that we build has been around as long as AI has been around, which is over 70 years now. And so it's not specific, first of all, it's not specific to autonomous systems, that autonomous vehicles. It's more specific, though, to intelligent systems that we have been building. I think in what my experience has taught me over the years is that as I look into a problem and try to determine what type of intelligent system to build in order to start addressing part of that problem, I need to decide whether strictly a knowledge-based or strictly a data-based approach will work. And my experience has taught me that there are very few cases where these extreme approaches will work on their own. So typically, and this is why I'm not a big proponent of, I mean, we get a lot of entrepreneurs who come through our doors and they're telling us about how they're solving a particular problem by just using some form of a neural network, whether it is a deep neural network or some other type of architecture. And what I tend to say to them is that, yeah, I agree that there is a class of problems that can be solved exclusively in this approach, but typically, and in order to avoid some of the problems that you mentioned, including biases, you need to balance kind of like the knowledge-based approach with embed certain world knowledge that you have into, and domain knowledge into the operations that you can do through extracting models from your data. So the long way of saying that this is a serious problem that's characteristic of intelligent systems, but is not only a characteristic of autonomous mobility. And in order to address it, you really need to be thinking upfront about the system that you're trying to build and how the intelligence, whether it is data-driven intelligence or ontological intelligence, is going to help you address it. So that's, as I said, there's an entire literature, for example, of how to do sampling of data in order to avoid this type of biases if you're using primarily a data-driven approach. But as I said, not a simple problem. You're asking some very hard questions,
and you're answering them quite well. It seems like the conventional wisdom is that more data is always better. In my experience, I've found that the right data is always better when more data leads to kind of call it polluted decision making. Like you said, a deep neural net that's thirsty for a ton of data, it's not always the best answer if potentially you could take a sample of higher quality data and maybe use a supervised machine learning approach. Is that consistent with what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, which is that you really need to understand the situation you're trying to address, the problem that you're trying to solve, and whether strictly a data-driven approach or some other hybrid approach will be the best way to solve that problem. And if so, if it is going to be a data-driven approach, what types of data and what distributions of data you will need to feed into your system. So I'll give you an example again from autonomous vehicles. If I have very detailed data that allows me to drive around Palo Alto in a very accurate, very correct way, time after time, but I have no other data about the rest of the world, and now I take that system, this autonomous system, and place it, let's say, in Boston. I can guarantee you that that system will not perform, if it is strictly data driven, it will not perform very well. So in that case, just gathering more data about Palo Alto, because you keep going around, is not going to make your system perform better in Boston. So in that case, more data will mean that I need to take samples from the cities where I want to operate, and I want to train my system. I want to make sure that my autonomous system can deal with the situations described in that in the data that I collect. And now I may not need the data of the same detail in each one of these regions, right? Because maybe I want to operate in specific parts of a city as opposed to operating in the entire city. But again, this is what I'm saying. You need to study the problem and determine where you need data and what is the type of data that you will need. But just because you're collecting more data doesn't necessarily make your system perform better.
Yeah, now unfortunately we're about at our witching hour. I think we got through about a third of the topics we had planned to discuss. But if you don't mind, I'm going to have you back, and we'll tackle some of the other meaty topics another time. Would that be all right?
That would be great. Thank you again for the opportunity. It was
good.
Wonderful.
But before I let you go, I've got one of my favorite questions. I always learn from this one. Share with me first and with the audience second. What's your advice for a younger version of Evangelos?
Throughout my my career, I try to have a couple of guiding principles. The first is that I believe that systems thinking typically has a lot of advantages. So I've tried to understand a number of areas and try to always bring them together to solve problems, right? As opposed to always being an expert in just one area. So what I advise younger people when I speak in universities in particular is to make sure, particularly in earlier phases of their education, of getting of becoming exposed to a few different areas rather than going very, very deep in one. The second thing is that I've always believed that it's not necessary for somebody to have a single career. I mean, in my own experience, I'm currently in my third career, if you will. And every time I have continued learning, and there is a thread in how I went from a technologist and solving deep engineering problems to now being an investor and advisor, and the entrepreneurship in between helped a lot. I think it made me a much better investor. The experience as a corporate executive made me a better entrepreneur. So I think that people need to be ready for that, and as opposed to insisting that whatever is their productive work life has to be centered around a single area.
Great advice. Well, this has been so much fun. I'm looking forward to parts 2 and maybe 3 of this. So thanks again, Evangelos. Great discussion.
Thank you very much.
And that wraps up another episode of AI and the Future of Work. Again, your host, Dan Turchin, coming at you this week, and looking forward to bringing you another great episode next week. To learn more about Evangelos and his work, please visit synapsepartners.co, synapsepartners.co. And tune in next week for another fascinating discussion.